Okay, my name is Erik Alexander. I direct the Brigham Education Institute, and it's just a real pleasure to touch base with all of you and welcome anyone who is new to any of our efforts. This is our second foray into a really fun effort, which we call the BEI's Global MedEd Café, and it's meant to really bring together a community of educators around a topic, make our world seem a little smaller, which is one of the benefits of Zoom and virtual education, and keep us thinking about active topics in our area. And a real pleasure to welcome Professor McKimm as kind of our expert. Dr. Ramani will be introducing her more formally.
Thanks, Erik. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Subha Ramani, and I work at the Brigham as an internist and educator, and also at the BEI. And it gives me absolutely great pleasure to introduce Professor Judy McKimm, whose current role is Director of Strategic Educational Development and Professor of Medical Education in the College of Medicine, Swansea University, that is in Wales. And I guess, is that where Catherine Zeta-Jones is from, Swansea? I'm not sure, but for movie aficionados, I just want to place that there. And Judy trained as a nurse and has an extensive academic background in social and health sciences, education, and management. If I were to list all her leadership positions, I think the hour will be up. So I will just say that she has served as a dean and educational leader at quite a few universities, including in New Zealand, in Australia, in the United Kingdom, but also for international organizations like the World Bank, WHO, and many educational associations around the world. And she leads the Masters in Leadership program at Swansea, but also in other parts of the world. In fact, she's currently doing a program for the health professions leaders. So I am going to step back at this point. I'll just introduce. So this is the topic of the today's session, leadership followership. And this is followership is not something we often talk about when we talk about leadership. And Judy's written a lot about this, and it's a very, very interesting concept. And this is our second BEI MedEd Global Cafe event. And we're going to keep all these World Cafe sessions very, very interactive. So I'm going to, we did the welcome. Erik did his welcome. I introduced the expert, but Judy will then lead us off with her pearls on leadership and followership. And after which we have 2 anchoring questions, and we'll have breakout group discussions. When we come back, we will have group reports back to Judy, who will give us her comments and additions on those reports. And then I'll conclude by summarizing just a couple of leadership topics. So with that, I will stop sharing, and Judy, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Oh, really good to be with you. Sorry, I'm just sharing my screen. Sorry, I'm on dual monitors, so okay. You should have a bit of a daffodil coming up. Really good to be here. As Subha says, we've been doing a lot of work together, collaboratively around the world with a group, and I see Elizabeth's here, who's one of our people. But today I'm going to really just give you just some little highlights, really, about the way that we're thinking about leadership at the moment. Following in the footsteps of the CanMed's Daisy, we invented the Swan. Well, we didn't invent the daffodil, obviously, that exists. And the daffodil is the national flower of Wales. So we created a leadership in threes model based around a daffodil. And this is our daffodil. In the middle of this daffodil is what we call the leadership triad. These are the skill sets here: leadership, management, and followership. And we're going to have a bit of a focus on followership now, because as Subha says, it's less well known than the leadership literature or the management literature. Around this daffodil are 6 petals. And in the petals, we talk about 3 levels that leadership operates: the intrapersonal, inside yourself; the interpersonal, how we work with groups and teams; and the organization or system level. We talk about delivery or development of leadership at undergraduate, postgrad and continuing professional development. That's us today. But increasingly we're seeing it at undergraduate level, more formally taught, which I think is really good. We see the expertise that people need in leadership. You need to know your industry. If that's medical education, you need to know the industry, the language, all that. Your strengths and your weaknesses and that wider context, the political, the economic, the trends, what's happening. You learn leadership in 3 ways. You learn a little bit of theory. We're not doing much theory today. Practice and feedback. That's really important. That's the core of it, really. And then development of phronesis, this practical wisdom about having that experience of being in situations or contexts. The key personal qualities that we think most leaders display are compassion and grit, which includes resilience and emotional intelligence. And then one of the things that certainly I've been reflecting on the last few years is how do we put these values into action? How do we demonstrate our accountability for the service, for our patients, for our students? How do we advocate for our teams, our organisations, our patients, our learners? Sometimes we've got to put our heads above the parapet and go more into an activist situation. So this leadership, Daffodil, pulls together some of the key aspects of leadership. And we've written quite a bit around this and around the Daffodil. At the centre then is the leadership triad. And this, we wrote about this in medical education a few years ago, myself and Helen O'Sullivan. And we said that actually this big focus on leadership actually undermines the worth and the activities that are managerial and those of followership. And you have to have all 3 working together, both for yourself and the people you work with. So that leadership then is the energy or the power. It provides the vision, the energy, the strategy, and this moral compass. So this is the doing the right thing. Okay. Management then brings another set of things in. This provides stability and order. It enables you to translate that vision to action. This is the doing things right, Peter Drucker would call that. And then the followership, this provides support and challenge to the leaders. And of course, leaders can't operate without followers. So we've got to be good leaders, we've got to be good managers, and we've got to be good followers. And we step in and out of that dance of leadership, almost moment to moment somehow. But today we're looking at followership primarily, and Ramani and Ulben in 2014, there's a really good edition of Leadership Quarterly focusing on followership. And really that issue was all about our understanding of leadership is incomplete without an understanding of followership. And it makes sense when you think about it, but it hadn't really been articulated until probably the mid to late 90s. This came about. And of course, we're paying much more attention now to followership in team working, and how to be an exemplary team member is often about being a good follower. We just label it differently. So in terms of leadership and followership, Steve Jobs says innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. I would say that's a bit of a provocation because I'm not sure that I think followers can be innovative. And of course, Apple, very innovative with leaders and followers. Followers need to feel significant, to be challenged and to belong. These are core human needs. And that would link with things like transformational leadership. And of course, no one leads all the time. We don't, even if the most senior leader will follow also. And professionals are very rarely passive, as we all know. This is, really thinking about how to work with people who have, high expectations and core values and loads of ideas. So Kelly, who was the first person probably to write a lot about followership, he suggested that there are 4 roles of followers. And he talked about passive followership. He talked about active followership, the little L leadership. This is leading in small ways. It's what I do a lot with my doctors in training. They'll take a project on or a quality improvement initiative. And then the big L leadership is that, top level leadership, the sort of CEO type thing that we tend to think of when we think about leaders. rather than leadership being distributed around the organisation or amongst the team members. Kelly also took that a little bit further, and he said what distinguishes followers is the extent to which they are more passive or more active, or the extent to which they're more independent, critical thinkers, or more dependent and less critical. And this is what he talked about. He talked about if you're passive and dependent, you're the passive followers. He called them the sheep in later writings. I'm not sure that's the best term. If you're passive but you're more critical, then you're more alienated. So these are people who often want to be the leader or see themselves in the role of the leader and are very critical of the leader. Exemplary followers, these are, or the star followers, they're sometimes called. These are active and critical. They're really good followers to have in your team because they'll challenge you, but they've got your back as well. And then the conformist followers, he calls these the yes people. And of course, at different times in our careers or our life or different situations, we'll move around here. You know, we might feel more conformist if we've got a really good leader. We might be more passive if we're not sure what we're doing, or we might move into that exemplary, or hopefully not the alienated. And then in the middle, you've got the pragmatists. They're the ones that sit on the fence and they won't go, they won't sort of support the leader or confront until they see which way the wind blows. So around the same time that Kelly was writing, Barbara Kellerman was also writing on followership, and she brought a slightly different angle at it. So she said she now started talking about the relationships, and this is where we are now with followership theory, that we're talking about the relationships. But she said no matter the situation, the culture or the era, they're more similar than they are different. There's some dominance and there's some deference. But she said the most important thing is the level of engagement. And she talked about this continuum of engagement from people who are really isolated or the bystanders. They feel and do absolutely nothing. So they're right. It's like, I'm not interested in the organisation. I'm not interested really. I'll just come in, do my job, go. Bystanders are the ones that watch and wait. They watch. The participants are the fuel that drives the engine. They're involved enough to care about what's going on and make that happen. And then the activists are the ones who are very passionate and deeply involved. They really push the organisation or the initiative or the project on. And then finally, we have the diehards. And the diehards are the people who would be like the whistleblowers, or in history, they might be martyrs, like Joan of Arc, or particularly religious or military leaders, where they would give their life almost for the organisation or for the cause. So we perhaps don't see too many right up at this end, but what we really probably see mostly is here in the middle, where people are engaged enough. Our role as leaders is to help engage our followers with whatever it is we want them to engage with. But as followers, you know, if we start finding ourselves alienated or isolated at this end, you know, it's something to ask us, well, what's going on with the team, the organisation, or with the leader themselves? And so I think the followership literature gives us a really nice way of looking at how leadership and followership works in tandem, and how followers help co-create things with leaders. And it isn't all about the leader. So we're moving away from what we call leader-centric theories and concepts. So on that note, I'll just pop the breakout rooms. Do you want me to stop sharing, Subha?
No,
or shall I just pop that one up?
Yeah. So
I'll hand over again.
For the next part of our session, we're going to divide, Caitlin is going to break us up into 4 breakout rooms. So these are the questions that we are going to discuss. So groups 1 and 2, just look at the top of your breakout rooms and you will see the group number. Groups 1 and 2 are going to talk about the first question, which is during the pandemic crisis or similar challenging situations, list 2 actions that you have used yourself or seen other leaders use to successfully address more of the immediate needs. So it's the immediate needs and strategies used of staff, learners, teachers, institution, just general leadership skills. And groups 3 and 4 will talk about the leadership actions that lead change during challenging situations, but really focus on long-term success or sustainability. So groups 1 and 2 will be the immediate leadership strategies, and groups 3 and 4 will talk about long-term success or sustainability. So I think, and we'll try to copy this on the chat so that you can, have these questions. So group 1, who was group 1? I think we were group 2. Anyone from group 1 who?
We were group 1, and Charles apparently is feeding back.
Okay. I'm not sure what I'm feeding back, but we got into this interesting discussion about hierarchies and and when they're potentially helpful, and hierarchies that potentially can be harmful, and ultimately, I think the answer was that, at least my answer and the way I interpret it was that we, that leaders need to invite participation from their followers and open up, two-way communication. Although in acute situations, hierarchies can be helpful and, can be, much more organizing. But I think what I sort of took away from it, and please, everyone correct me if you think I'm misinterpreting this, was that we need to get people to be speaking all the same language. That, when you have groups that are, attuned to a group, sort of the principles of what I call crisis resource management, people, what we teach, people understand those principles, and there are other people that don't understand those principles. That's when you tend to get utter chaos. So I think, good groups have good leaders, but also have good followers that can work together to get the job done. And one of the things we talked about is, making sure that things are patient-centric and not egocentric. That's a principle that I think is really, really important as well.
That sounds pretty good for a report back. So can I add my group 2 bit, and then we can let Judy, essentially we're talking about what leaders need to do to react immediately to crisis. So my group came up with, the messaging is good, but it needs to be authentic. And also vulnerability, or saying that we don't have all the answers. And yet, after all the commiserating, we need to keep the team moving on tasks and have some action plans. So those were the big things coming from our group. So Judy, any reactions before we go to sustainability?
No, I think quite similar things, aren't they, really? It's sort of, some of it's quite basic sort of team working principles, isn't it, almost, about, building the relationships, attending to process, as well as keeping on task, knowing when to prioritize which and when in which situation. But you've got these hierarchies. Hierarchies are there for one reason, but leadership isn't always vested in position. And position, even though position gives you power, the leadership should actually be more dispersed in a way, and or distributed, shared, collective, collaborative. They're the sort of words we're using in healthcare now around the leadership that works. But sometimes you need a hierarchy, and sometimes you need command and control leadership, because that's what you need. And the crisis, like an immediate, urgent, acute clinical situation, will perhaps need that. But something like the COVID pandemic, we need a mixture, because we do need some command and control, but that's more about the management, getting the right PPE and the right kit and the right drugs and the right patients in the right place. So a lot of that's managerial. The leadership you need needs to be compassionate. It needs to listen, doesn't it? That's what I've seen in the NHS. And we had a bit of a conversation before Simon went about that really listening to, what do you need? What do you need from me? Yeah, and obviously you got the moon, or you might want the stars and get the moon, or whatever. But actually, it's thinking about that. And Erik, you're absolutely right in the chat, because leaders and leadership are different. And the language we use now tends to be about leadership, around followership, and about management, not about managers, leaders, and followers. And we've really moved on, I think, in the literature, but hopefully also in our practice. So sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded answer to what you said, but really interesting. I'll silence.
To your point, Judy, Kevin, who joined our group, also talked about leaders being collaborative and also listening to people. And I added the above, beside, and below. So that's the listening. So if we could probably talk about the other groups and discuss, leadership skills or leadership strategies for sustainability or long-term success.
Okay, well, I think I'm supposed to talk for group number 3. And we had 2 Bostonians, 1 Singaporean, and I'm a New Yorker. So we had different perspectives. And the key things that we talked about was the relationship or the juxtaposition between compliance and alienated following. None of it is good in its extreme and can create problems for anything you do, short-term and long-term. We talked about politics a lot and we reflected on the current situation that we in the US face. And our Singaporean friend, Andrew Ong, was very kind to listen to that. And we also talked about promotion, what helps somebody be promoted. And at what point do you have to separate yourself from the demands of the environment to comply with the rules in order to be true to yourself and to focus on what your own needs are. And ultimately, that will be the most important thing, regardless of promotion. But please, the rest of you, please, can you follow up and share more?
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'll just do a quick shout out to Andrew, who's in Singapore at midnight. And he told us a really great story about his approach, both what had worked in COVID, and I think he had a great story about leadership for the long term. Andrew, could you tell us a little bit about that again?
Right, sure. So hi, everyone. So here's midnight from Singapore. So I'm a GI physician and I'm a fellowship program director of my institution as well. So I was just sharing with the group that with COVID, there's so many changes that happens on a daily basis and we just have to keep adjusting. So one of the ways that I've noticed in making a change sustainable is to actually comply with the organization first and then trying to get the buy-in from within. So I'll just give you an example. So when COVID happened, the whole country went into this heightened mode where all my trainees was sent to the front line just to cover the isolation wards. And it was a problem for me because they were taken out of their training. And I knew all of them had many issues being away from their family and struggling with burnout. But if I were to just bring this up to my leaders and telling them that this is an issue, and I was just trying to protect my trainees, I wasn't going to get anywhere. So what I had to do was, in fact, I joined in the fight with them. I actually went into the isolation wards together with my trainees. And I made sure that they complied with what the organization wanted. And then once I was within, I started to show my leaders what the true issue was about how individual trainees were all struggling with being away from their families and being away from everyone else. And then they saw what I was seeing, and then I could get the influential people just to back me up. And then we started making changes from within. But that made me realize that if I had started out in the whole situation just insisting on what I wanted, I wasn't going to change anything in the long run, and that was just going to be even more disappointing. So doing what I did, just looking back, I made changes that was more sustainable in the long run. So even though in the beginning it looked like I was just being a yes man and just not supporting my trainees, they started to see what I was trying to do in the end, and it's just we still have many challenges, but I think that was just something that I reflected and found useful.
Thank you.
I can jump in. That was a great story, Andrew, and I totally agree. We were group 4 and also tasked with the question of how does change and leadership become something more, whatever you're doing, whatever you're changing or moving towards, evolving towards, how does it sustain? And we picked up on a little bit of what I think you were saying as well, which is there is a real important power to co-creation and connecting with the group, your followers, as much as the leadership you're bringing to it, that there needs to be a community there that is formed and a belief that you're all in this going the same direction. So that was a core principle we thought about as well for sustainability. The other piece that came up for us as at least an idea, a guiding principle that I think all of us felt connected to was that sustainability of a project often has more success also when you start sometimes a little smaller and then you iterate. That often what you think is going to be the step that you see ahead doesn't always work out the way you envisioned it. So that adaptation. And in particular, Karen brought up the idea that you have to operationalize whatever the pedagogical thing is, or the assessment tool, or the novel idea, that it needs to be something that has the ability to repeat itself and function within your system. So that was maybe almost the metric of knowing you've made something sustainable, that you've operationalized it so that it actually functions repetitively.
So we can let Judy respond to all the comments made by us, and then we can bring it, summarize and bring it to a close.
Okay, with lots of comments. I don't know where to start, really. I suppose one of the things that you were talking about just then is about operationalizing, isn't it? And that takes us right back to the triad, the leadership triad, the leadership, the management, and the followership. You've got to have the management. What do we say? Vision without action is hallucination. Yeah. So you've got to be able to operationalize that. And I think sustainability, we're talking about at all sorts of different levels, aren't we? Sustainability of the service, sustainability perhaps of individual initiatives or projects, sustainability of the planet. There's a really good open access medical teacher issue just come out on about planetary health and education for sustainable healthcare that I've co-edited with Michelle McLean and Trevor Gibbs. So that's quite a nice little bedtime reading, because that concerns me, you know, that as health, very concerning. So that brings me to a second point, which is about the moral purpose, the values that hold us together. That's actually what will sustain us. And I think, Charles, what did you call it? Patient centricity, not ego centricity. It's about, was that right? Yeah, did I get it right? It's about the patients and the service and the legacy that we leave. And then that takes us back to what we would call servant leadership, leaving a legacy, looking after something and giving it back in better shape. Whatever we do, whatever we touch, that's all we can do as one person. We can't do more than that. Okay, we'd like to change the world, but it's not really going to happen. And then going back to Andrew's point then about that idea around compliance, I would frame it slightly different. And I've worked a lot in Singapore, but I know what you mean. But it's about knowing the politics of the place, knowing when to push, when to come back, when to just go round. What do we say? Work with, work against, work around. They're the three things we can do. And we've got to know when to do each of those. And then finally, I'm just keeping an eye on the chat. We have written them on eco-ethical leadership, which was our latest one, I think. But talking about this issue of power, we often think of power as a really dirty word, but I think of power as energy. And I think if you think of power as energy, the energy in the room, the thing that makes things work, sometimes you've got to have that positional power or resource power or whatever power it might be, or referent power or influence to make things happen. So as leaders, we do need power. We won't, nothing will happen if we don't have the power to do things. So we've got Machiavelli in the chat here. Yeah, this is really what I'm saying. It's narrative, isn't it? Yeah, you know, when your power is low, then your influence needs to be high. but you've also got to know what you can't influence and where your power ends. And that's where you need to get other people. That's why we need to collaborate. He knows that person, they know that person, and they've got this bit of space and that bit of kit. So you've got back to that, leader as connector. So
Judy, I have a question for you, if I can throw one in.
Yeah, throw it in.
How do you think about leadership? Same, or what are the big differences in a time of crisis or not in a time of crisis? So the 90% of normality versus how you lead, or what changes during the 10% of crisis?
One of my students and I, she did it. She did a rapid literature review looking at the COVID-19 literature on crisis and, our responses to the crisis. And she came out with, there were 3 things really about communications. We need that whether it's a crisis or not, about decision making, and about those sort of core things that are really, really important. A crisis leader often has to make quicker decisions with less information. However, and also nothing will be perfect, and sometimes it's better to do something than nothing. So it really is down to those sort of ways of decision making, and then communicating and talking out and thinking through and hearing from people, what is possible.
And a quick follow-up, do we know of any differences in followers during a crisis or not in a crisis?
Well, I'm not sure we've done an awful lot on that. I'm not so aware, but I would suspect it'll be in response to the leader. And I think you're almost back to Kelly's diagram again, aren't you? If it's command and control, and this is how we have to do it, and this is what's happening, well, you follow. It might not be a time to speak out, as Andrew was saying. There are times to speak out and speak up, and there are times to just go with it. But then once things start to settle, that's where, I feel that's really where we are in the UK at the moment. Everything is so turbulent with COVID and our second wave, or third or 19th, whatever it is, and parts of the country in lockdown. We're going lockdown on Friday in Wales, whole of Wales. The north is in tier 3, whatever tier 3 is. So the whole country's fragmenting, and this is where the followers start to get disgruntled and start to question the leaders more, because it's not consistent communication and it's not clear, and it often doesn't make sense. And, I look across the pond, it's similar, isn't it? In the US, all different states have all different things going on, and it's confusing for everybody. And then your compliance is very low, because if you don't trust your leaders, once that goes, then gone. And I think we trust our First Minister in Wales and the Welsh Government quite well. I think they've been good. But I look across the border at England, and it's a nightmare, really. We're recording this, aren't we? So don't send it to Boris. It is, though. It's it's messy. And it's in a complex system. You can't have such mess. You've got to make straight, simpler rules. So, yep.
Thank you, Judy. So I guess the time is almost up, and I'm just going to bring it to a close, because I chose a couple of slides as summary slides, and but I had no idea what people were going to discuss, and I'm glad I chose these.
Yeah, these are the right ones. Yeah, you're right.
They're the right ones. And so there are 2 leadership styles or formats that I chose from the Harvard Business Review. One is, of course, adaptive leadership. And what is adaptive leadership? It's about change that enables the capacity to thrive and navigate disequilibrium. And everything all of you said, falls under that. But successful change also builds on the past. You don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. It occurs through experimentation. So we move on the task, but then we continue to experiment. I think Chuck said that. It relies on diversity. And our group actually talked about Black's, formula, the allies, opponents, bedfellows, and fence-sitters, a model which I can talk afterwards if anyone doesn't know the model. It relies on, adaptation takes time and requires learning, which means the leaders have to listen. I think what everyone said, mistakes happen and should be viewed as learning opportunities, which was also said. But the one thing that really struck me was it's not always about meeting expectations, but it could also be about challenging them. And this is where followers, good followers, are so important. And the final thing, which came up in our group, was actually emotional intelligence. So the same people who've written about EI also wrote about this model of leadership, which is primal leadership. It was a wonderful article which talks about emotional styles of leaders which set the work environment, which is that, enhance or not moods of staff and teams around them, and which influence the performance of the team and team well-being. So emotional intelligence is an integral part of leadership, but the one thing we talk about is authenticity as well. So leaders can't always be cheerleaders and be fake in communicating a positive outcome. It also needs to be authentic. So I chose those two to summarize, but I think all the discussions were very much consistent with those two summary slides. Thank you, Judy, so much. We talk a lot, and it has been a great pleasure to introduce Judy to the rest of you who don't know Judy. And
I just wanted to jump in and thank everyone as well. It's a real joy to bring together a community that otherwise isn't connected by physical space. So to know we have people on from Asia, from North America and Europe is really the goal of what we wanted. And here we are making it happen. So I love a conversation. That's what this was. I thank you so much, Dr. Ramani, Professor McKimm, and for everyone who joined us. It's been great. And let's do it again in 6 or 8 weeks, whenever the next one is.
Thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed it.